Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland. My name is Susan Hammer and I'm the President-elect of City Club. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to ask you to turn off your cell phones, pagers, and other noise-making devices. First, we have a few announcements. Next Friday, November 18th, our program will be Chinatown's Role in a Vibrant Community with master storyteller Charlie Chin, co-sponsored with the Library Foundation. Under the leadership of our City Club membership chair, Jake Okenberg, we have welcomed a number of new City Club members to City Club recently. And I'd like to introduce those of you who are here today and ask you to wave and be acknowledged. Welcome to Alex Johnson, John Leslie, Leonard Lockhart, Stacy Triplett, and Dwayne Johnson. I'd also like to welcome the American Leadership Forum, Class 20, who's sitting down here today. City Club has a number of upcoming events. On Monday, November 28th, the Citizens Read Book Group will discuss Culture Wars, The Myth of a Polarized America by Morris Fiorni, Samuel Abrams, and Jeremy Pope. The discussion will be moderated by David Mandel. Copies of the book are available today and can be purchased in the back or at the City Club office. 10% of the proceeds will go to City Club. On Monday, November 14th, the Business and Technology Issues Committee will host Acting Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Economic Development, Sandy Barra, who is a former native of Portland, or is a native of Portland and a former City Club member. He will address the President's proposed Strengthening America's Communities initiative. RSVPs are requested for this special program. On Tuesday, November 15, the Education and Human Development Issues Committee will host Linda Castillo from the Coalition for Latino Education. She will speak on the topic of education and social justice. Details on these items can be found in your weekly bulletin and online at www.pdxcityclub.org. While you're on our website, you can also find information about membership, TV and radio broadcasts, and of course, our Citizens Blog online forum. You can listen to today's forum online, or we will have audio, CDs, and videotapes available for purchase. Sponsors this quarter are McEwen Giswold, LLP, and Medico Support Systems Services of the Northwest, Inc. Please join me in thanking our sponsors. Our program today is entitled Gambling in Oregon, Economic Tonic, Fiscal Band-Aid, or SOAR on the Body Politic. Last week, after the $340 million Powerball winner was announced, many Oregonians who had probably never played the Oregon lottery before thought, maybe next time I'll buy a ticket. We may know who the winners are, but do we know who loses? What are the unforeseen consequences of our growing dependence upon lottery funds to meet state revenue needs? 10 years ago, the governor's task force on gambling warned us of some of the consequences. But despite the stark warnings, we have not had a broad public discussion or a vote about the desired place of gambling in our society. We have proceeded to incrementally expand the lottery. So what about the next 10 years? How has the lottery affected us? And do we need to change course? We are fortunate today to have a very knowledgeable moderator and 3 outstanding panelists. There is so much to be said about each of these individuals, but I will keep it brief. The moderator for today's program is Chip Lazenby. Chip is a member of the City Club Board of Governors. He's also an attorney at the Portland law firm of Bullivant Hauser Bailey. From 1995 to 2001, he served as general legal counsel to Governor John Kitzhaber, and at that time, Chip participated in development of the governor's policy on gambling, and he negotiated all the gaming compacts with the Oregon tribes. Our first panelist is Mark Haas. Mark Haas is an Emmy Award-winning journalist who left his career in 1999 to make a difference in the state he loves most. A year later, voters elected him to the Oregon legislature, and he has served there ever since. Representative Haas helped oversee the reform of the public employee retirement system, a reform that is said to will save taxpayers $9 billion over the next 10 years. With 4 years' experience on the House Revenue Committee, Representative Haas has become one of the legislature's strongest advocates for restructuring Oregon's tax system. Welcome. Our next panelist is David Leslie. Mr. Leslie has been Executive Director of the Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, a statewide association of 16 Christian denominations, and one of the nation's largest and longest-lasting regional ecumenical associations. Before coming to Portland in 1997, he served as Executive Director of Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston, and was the founding Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity in Austin, Texas. Our final panelist is Robert Whelan. Robert Whelan is an economist who has been with ECONorthwest since 1996. He served on the governor's task force on gaming. He has conducted numerous groundbreaking studies on Oregon's gaming industry. To name a few, a comprehensive casino revenue forecast for Oregon's 7 tribal casinos, a market study of casino customers, a feasibility analysis for casino expansions. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and our panelists.
Thank you, Susan. I've been asked by Wendy, who runs the City Club, to begin with a mild disclaimer. I have an odd sort of neutrality about gambling, especially today. I went to Las Vegas in March and returned to Oregon with a lot of money. I went to Las Vegas over the weekend for a conference and returned this week very, very light with money. So I am very neutral on the subject of gambling. Having had those 2 experiences neutralize me at this point. I want to talk a little bit about just our format for today. I've asked each of the panelists from their own perspectives to make a short statement of about 3 minutes or so, their views on gambling and how it is affecting Oregon from their unique perspective. And then once they've made those comments, we're then going to, I will then direct a question to each one of them and allow the other panelists to comment on that answer, again within a 3 to 4 minute time frame for each one. And then we have a panel question that we will ask them each to respond to. And then I think you have a question, as is typical, the first question from the City Club, and then we will throw it open to the mics. So with that, I think we're going to begin and move from left to right. We'll begin with Bob Whelan.
Yes, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of the Oregon lottery and give you an idea of the size of the gaming industry in Oregon. The Oregon lottery started 20 years ago, and it started at first by the sale of scratch tickets. Those are the little lottery games you see in Safeway and Albertson stores. But in November of that year, they came up with a lotto game. Lotto is one of those games where they draw 6 numbers out of, in this case, 38, and if you get them all right, you win $1 million or more. And ironically, the first winner of the Megabucks lottery was a rich gentleman from Lake Oswego, and I remember watching him on TV, and he seemed more concerned about the tax consequences than what he was going to do with the money. But it's grown since then, and interestingly enough, in order to make the grand prize higher in Megabucks, they went from picking 6 out of 38 numbers to picking 6 out of 48 numbers, and a gradual ratcheting up. So now the odds of winning have gone from 1 chance out of 2.5 million to about 1 chance in 12 million. In 1989, the lottery added sports betting. We were only the 2nd state to have a sports betting lottery. and all of that money goes to college sports. Then in '91, Keno was added. In '92, they added the Powerball lottery, which is that big prize that fellow in Southern Oregon just won. They also started video poker. And back then, video poker, they had 236 retailers. All of them had liquor licenses. That was a requirement because they didn't want anyone under 21 playing the game. All other gaming in the state you can play at the age of 18. And bingo you can play at any age, ironically. That's another story. And they started with 1,000 machines, 236 retailers. Today, that's gone up tenfold plus. And it's ratcheted up. A few years ago, the requirement was 5 machines maximum per bar or restaurant. Now that went up to 6. Then they let the racetracks have 10. Now the racetracks can have 30 machines. All this being done because there's a constitutional, the Constitution prohibits casinos, and but they don't define what a casino is and how many machines is a casino. Now we have line games. In May, they added line games. And what happened was they went from video poker to changing the machines to simulate a regular slot machine at a regular casino. And the games are identical in some cases to what you'd see in a Las Vegas casino. The amount of money being brought in is quite substantial. Those line games, by the way, probably contribute about $60, $70 million a year at the current rate of extra money to the state coffers. In last year, which is we tally up the total amount of gaming being done, Oregon Lottery's gaming revenues was $675 million. Now that's not the amount of money the state gets. That's the amount of money people lose betting on lottery games. That's the revenue. And out of that, they pay their expenses, they pay the retailers, the rest goes to various funds. 675 is the Oregon Lottery. That was 58% of all the gambling done in the state. 412 million were the casinos, the 9 Indian tribe casinos, and 73 million was all the other gambling being done. It's about $1.1 billion. It's the total gambling market. That's the size of the market. It has been growing. It's it grew 6% last year. It'll probably grow more than that this year because income levels are growing. When we track gaming revenues in the state, we find they track very closely with personal income, and personal incomes are up a lot this year. So that's what the gaming market looks like, and that's where we're going.
All right. David?
Of course, in addition to the numbers of the human side, and as we see throughout the state, that there's also, in addition to the economic statistics, the numbers are the people side. And our historic witness and, I guess, work on the lottery has been grounded in an opposition to commercialized gaming out of both a religious vision and about the quality of life in our society, the impact that gaming has on vulnerable, at-risk people and communities, as well as all of us, and specifically the role that state government should play is it sets a mark and sustains certain kind of foundational institutions in our society, such as public education, safety, and public health. We testified on February 2nd before the Oregon House Committee on Trade and Economic Development, stating our position, and I think it clearly, I'll just extract a bit from that because I think it makes clear our position. Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon does not support any proposal that increases the state's reliance on gaming revenue to fund essential public services. We believe it is unwise to fund state government with gaming revenue. We believe there's no compelling public interest for government to promote gaming. We furthermore believe that gambling is addictive and preys upon the vulnerable. State sponsorship and advertisement of gambling sends a wrong message to our children. It undervalues the earning of money from work and we believe that the proper role for government is to limit the negative impacts on society. Again, as an organization with membership that is serving people throughout the state, we always are interested in how does this impact people. And as you well know, gaming is pervasive in our society. I took the boys to the sporting goods store the other day, and right as I walked in was the Texas Hold'em kiosk. I went to Borders bookstore the other day. There's books on gaming and gambling. The billboards are full of advertisement. We hear about the advertisement of how the lottery is good for salmon, fish, kids, and schools. But did you also know that right now at least 36,000 Oregonians are problem gamblers, and more than 23,000 are pathological gamblers, or those with persistent and recurrent maladaptive gambling behavior that disrupts family, personal, or vocational pursuits? The Oregon Department of Human Services Problem Gaming Services Manager, and through a study that they have conducted and research, estimates that right now 1 in every 25 Oregon teens are classified as problem or pathological gamblers. That's more than 10,000 young people in Oregon. We mentioned just a minute ago video slots or line games coming online that have been characterized by some as the crack cocaine of the industry, or to put it another way, video slots have been described as the most, quote, the most addictive form of gambling in history. It's estimated by the Department of Human Services that every year, with the addition of this new form of gaming, we'll be facing some 8,000 new problem gamblers a year. What are the costs? Recent studies estimate that for each problem gambler, you could put a factor of $3,000 in social economic costs, $11,000 for each pathological gambler. That's for treatment, most directly counseling, and then other kind of correlating costs, which put the estimate at somewhere over $361 million in cost to Oregonians. And as you probably know, it's just like with any addiction, whether it's drug or alcohol addiction, for every individual that is a gambling addict, the impact is not going to be just on that person, him or herself. That will also include family members, co-workers. If somebody goes bankrupt because they've gone bankrupt through gambling, it could take down businesses. Some people estimated that there's at least another 7 persons that are impacted directly or indirectly for each person with a gambling problem. The other thing that's interesting in Oregon is that while Oregon has one of the probably premier gambling treatment programs in the United States, it also has one of the highest rates of gambling losses per adult. I think in a study in 2002, every adult Oregonian, if you did it that way, lost over $471. The problem is not every Oregonian gambles. The department estimates that could be about 60%. So you back out the 40% and suddenly you see that cost sharing definitely being shared by fewer and fewer people, so the costs of that go up. I think that's just a few of the human impacts. And then what we'll also want to pursue is also what is the role of the state as a marketer of a problem, of a product that clearly has a serious public health implications.
Well, what a great segue. Purpose of the State Representative Mark Haas.
Thank you. I just want to say it's an honor to be up here in front of your organization and with these distinguished panelists. I was a journalist, and now I'm in state government, and I always point to a quote from Jim Hightower. He said, "When I entered politics, I took the only downward turn you could take from journalism," and sometimes I do feel like that. And I was in the news for a long time, and we did stories, and usually there were stories with good guys and bad guys. And so when I see myself up here next to David from Ecumenical Ministries and then me, I know where I stand here. I guess, I'm the pit boss or something. And I just want to make sure that before we go any further, that you all know that I'm not thrilled about the idea of my state that I love paying for schools and state government partially from gambling proceeds. About 10 years ago, when I was a reporter, I did a story on a little old lady who, for whatever reason, we ended up in her home, and she had lost everything to video poker, and she showed me her bank statements with hundreds of canceled checks that she had written to a bar in Northwest Portland that's closed now called Joe's Cellars. And they were $300 or $400 every night, January 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And she showed those to me, and it made me so mad that some guy, a bartender or the owner over there, kept cashing those checks, and nobody ever said to her, hey, why don't you quit this, or why don't you go get some help? And so I get that, and I understand that. But where I come from is to point out the history that you've heard a little bit about that was started in 1984, and it was created by Oregon voters, not by the legislature, but by voters, and it passed with 66% of the vote. It was also an asterisk by this. It was the first time that big money was in an initiative, and it was put up by a company that made money from the scratch-off tickets that were sold back then. And so was there an ulterior motive? I don't know. I think so. Would it have passed anyway? Probably. But it was the will of Oregonians, who I think thought that maybe it might be a fun distraction, and if it threw in some money to the state to help create jobs, then that would be good. I wanted to do a PowerPoint and show some graphics here, but I was told there are several million people listening on PBS, and so I won't do that. And so I ask you to build a graphic in your mind of a stair step from that 1985 year when $11 million went to the state, going up through the 90s with the advent of video poker, and pretty soon it was hundreds of millions, and those stairs got much steeper, to the point to where we are now in this current budget. We have $937 million in lottery profits that went to our state general fund. The forecast for the next biennium is $1.1 billion. Okay? And put up a new graphic. Show yourself a pie. And in 1985, there was just a sliver, okay? A sliver of that pie, the kind your grandmother asked for at Thanksgiving. Just give me a sliver. And the pie kept getting bigger as our state government grew, but that slice of the pie got bigger and bigger, and this year it is 8%. 8% of the general fund comes from lottery profits. Okay? That's my size of pie. That's a big piece of pie. Now, I know all about the ills of gambling and promoting gambling, but what I'm here to say is, after 6 years of the Revenue Committee and seeing what the lottery has done for this state in terms of revenues only, and seeing that 2 years ago when we had a vote to temporarily raise taxes to get through this economic downturn and the state citizens said, no, thank you, then I want to just say, wait a second. Before anybody jumps up and says, let's repeal this, you tell me where we're going to find $1 billion. Because if you're just saying, let's repeal this because we don't like it, and then you just figure out how to deal with it after that, it is no different than Bill Sizemore or Don McIntyre saying, we're going to cut taxes, and you guys just figure out what happens if we take 30% of your revenue away. After Measure 30 failed, 56 school districts shortened their school year. And I'm responsible for that. I feel responsible for that. And there are a lot of legislators down there, in spite of what you've been reading about, who are very responsible people. And when 56 school districts close their school years early, I feel we have to hold the line toward people who are frankly much more powerful than the coalitions that don't like lottery, but people who want to repeal the estate tax, business interests who want to increase tax breaks, and people that might want to take away the lottery. I feel like that Jack Nicholson character in A Few Good Men. You want me on that wall, and you need me on that wall, and the schools and our revenue system depend on that money. Now, I would much rather have us debating today in this state why we need to restructure our entire tax system. To me, frankly, the lottery is a sideshow to that. And but until we do that, I'm not ready to put these schools at risk any further by arguing the merits of whether the estate tax is good or bad, or whether this tax breaker is good or bad. That's nibbling around the edges. So I am not an advocate of more and more gambling, and I don't think it's okay. But this is the world that I came into 6 years ago, and for now, I feel a tremendous responsibility to keep these schools open all year long and to keep our government working the way it used to work when I grew up in this great state.
All right. Thank you very much, folks. I'm going to ask the first question because I think it was raised here a little bit, and in the time that I have been grappling with gambling issues, it's a lot like these visual illusions where do you see the faces or do you see the vase? And I'm going to point this at Bob Whelan and ask him, you've been looking at this a lot. You've been working with clients that offer gambling, but you've also been looking at the economics, and you know a lot about the sort of ancillary effects of that. So there's little agreement among casual observers about the actual economic benefits, and by that I mean these trade-offs between the huge amounts of revenues that Representative Hass was talking about and the social costs that David Leslie raised. As you've looked at this and as an economist, how do you, and your opinion is, as I say, everybody disagrees, but in your opinion, where's the balance in that? Do we come off better in terms of dollars, or is the social cost really too great for us to bear?
Well, it's a tough question. The reality is that within any population, a certain portion likes to gamble. And this is true in every culture, in every corner of the earth, any population. And this is a result of how society is developed. Within any society, you need a certain proportion of your community to be risk-taking individuals. And usually it's a quarter to a third of the population. And then you have another quarter of the population that are risk avoiders. And then in the middle are people who are followers. They won't take the chance, but if the risk takers succeed, they'll follow them. So what we find in study after study after study, about 30% of the population actively gambles. There are people that once in a blue moon will buy a lottery ticket, but about a little less than a third will gamble frequently. And this is normal, because in any society cannot survive without risk takers. But if a society consists only of risk takers, then, well, bedlam would ensue. You need a society where some people hold back, some people take chances. So you see that anyway. If you take away the Oregon lottery, you'll still have gambling in the state. You take away the casinos, you'll still have gambling in the state. The form will change. The location will change. One of the effects of the Oregon lottery and the casinos has been a marked decrease in the number of visits people make to Nevada to gamble, particularly Reno, from Oregon. A big decline in illegal gambling, except for bookmaking. And people forget that this is the West. People moved out here. The people who moved out here were primarily risk-taking individuals. They gambled, and they gambled a lot. There were slot machines in bars all over the state. That's one of the reasons why they put video poker in. Remember the old gray machines that the bars would have? The St. Paul Rodeo used to have blackjack and slot machines in the 1920s. Little country clubs and Elks clubs would have slot machines back in the 50s. It was commonplace. When I moved out here from New York 24 years ago, God forbid, when I went back at the holidays, I used a Portland expression that's "you bet." And people in Portland say it all the time, "you bet." Does that taste good? Oh, you bet. One point, my brother turns to me and says, "Bet what?" And I found out, well, the origin of that is poker in saloons, in Portland, in Seattle. It's part of the culture, I'm afraid. That's what it is. A certain portion of the population likes to gamble. Turns out 0.9% of the population are pathological gamblers, current pathological gamblers. But what's ironic is the percent of pathological gamblers in the surveys in Oregon and Washington in the last several years has actually declined. It's declined. And this is from Rachel Volberg, who does the survey on pathological gambling. She's no fan of gambling. It's declined. It is a problem. It's a serious problem for those individuals. But for most people, it isn't a disease. It's something they do. It's something they enjoy doing. Is it a waste of time? To somebody who doesn't gamble, it sure looks like a waste of time. But there are a lot of things other people do that I would think are a waste of time, but they seem to enjoy themselves. I'm not about to stop them.
Any brief comments, 30 seconds from either one of you, Mark or Dave?
I would just say, in this biennium, the state is spending $9 million on gambling addiction, and as was noted, Oregon's programs through DHS in that area are nationally recognized. Interestingly enough, especially in sort of some groundbreaking areas of attacking gambling addicts who are women. A sort of interesting sort of new research shows that a lot, and actually more than half, increasingly are women, and radio and TV and programs trying to ease that.
Well, I think it's interesting that the other part of that formula is, how much is spent on marketing of the Oregon Lottery. I mean, the pressure to continue to build that base, to drive more revenue. It's just like any marketing of products. I think the other side to be thoughtful of is in how much is actually spent on marketing of gambling services, problems that could arise as we do with drinking and other kind of addictive products. And as I understand, it's 10% of what's dedicated for marketing positive goes into marketing the problem resources in the state. And I think, it's just something to think about as we think about this particular product. Pathological gamblers, yes, a small percent, but problem gamblers, a very large percent. And I think, again, whether it's growing proportionally, it's definitely growing in numbers. That would naturally follow as more and more people gamble.
But David brings up an interesting point about marketing for treatment, because so we haven't used the word compulsive gambler, and that's because it's not a compulsive behavior. Compulsive behavior is something you do repeatedly that you don't want to do. A lot of pathological gamblers want to gamble. They do not seek treatment in the same percentages as people with compulsions might. So you need to do an outreach, and that may be a reason why so many women get picked up on the DHS services, because they're more apt to ask for help when they see the problem. So it does require this marketing effort. It would be very valuable.
I'm going to shift to you, Dave, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here from the foregoing that we've been talking about. I'm familiar with Ecumenical Ministries, and your members do great work, and a lot of the programs that some of your constituent churches and other organizations do, they carry out programs that really serve the poor and the sick and people that are very needy, but they do that with subsidy from the state. Representative Haas has talked about the significant portion that the lottery has had. I don't think that you can suggest that we move away or reduce our reliance on lottery without suggesting an alternative source of revenue that could help support those services. So I'm going to ask you now to talk about the other side of it rather than the human side of it. What solutions do you have that could provide additional revenues to continue those essential services?
Well, I think that Representative Haas made a great point, just the quandary we're in. I think some may remember the editorial that ran the New York Times about 10 years ago, written by the then Attorney General Kulangoski and former Assistant Attorney General Peter Bragdon, who wrote, almost 10 years ago, quote, "The truth is any state that depends heavily on gambling for revenue will find itself under pressure to increase gambling," that kind of addiction. And what I think we have also always put with the opposition is to say the corresponding piece that we also need to be very serious about is tax reform. How that looks, again, that will come out as we do the serious work, and part of the problem, we're not doing it. And I think that even this last session, if I'm not mistaken, when the governor presented his proposed budget for the biennium, the only revenue increase that I remember was from gaming. So it's a very politically expedient way, if not convenient way, to kind of cut the conversation off. And Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, along with many other nonprofit groups that struggle day in and day out of serving people in this state, thinking about public education, at a time which is very interesting to note that, yes, while we rely more on gaming and it's producing more revenue, we seem to be seeing real challenges in keeping the schools open anyway. I was talking to a friend of mine who has an elementary school child in Silverton. So during this last session, we didn't increase taxes. We put more gaming revenue in, and yet still seeing cuts to art, science, language, and things of that nature. So it's still a problem in spite of that. And so I think we understand that to some extent our belief is that the increasing dependence upon gaming is also working as a barrier on tax reform, and looking at that public conversation about raising beer and wine taxes, looking at adjusting the corporate minimum tax. How do we tie our tax structure to the federal? So we're just not really having these conversations. And I think we've always tied the two together and never made it one or the other.
Comments from Bob or Mark?
Well, I've just always been baffled by this state's 2 or 3 year long-running discussion about the percentage of commissions paid to lottery retailers, and it just seems to dominate editorial pages and everything. But the much larger and significant issue of tax reform, nobody wants to talk about. And there's a reason for that. It's very complex, it's nuanced, and there's some political kryptonite there, as I found out. And I can understand politicians not wanting to get close to it, and I can understand consultants telling them not to get close to it if you want to get elected again. But to me, that's not an excuse. And we need political leaders of the legislature and a governor willing to engage voters who have to be less complacent, get away from the TV and out in front of the computer, to look at what we have now and say, should we try something better? Because what we have now isn't working all that well. We have a tax system that is so dependent upon the income tax, which pays 90% of the bills. It just is a system that brings in too much in good times and not enough in bad times. And it's during these bad times where Oregon has a train wreck. Because in bad times, you still need to run schools, you still need to keep prisons open, and in those bad times, you have the greatest demands on government services. That's the part we need to fix. And I've been working for 6 years with others on computer models and how to do that. We just don't have the political will or the citizen engagement to get there. And if we don't have that, and if we don't have taxpayers willing to step up with higher taxes, then I don't want to hear people saying, well, we need to get rid of the legislature because it's bad. And by the way, you need to find $1 billion more to help run your schools.
Well, that actually leads me to the question that I was going to pose to you. And Bob, I'll give you extra time to talk on both of these questions. But you know, in my view, the sort of 800-pound elephant that's sitting in the middle of the budget mess in Salem is K-12 education. You know, we continue to trade off everything in terms of doing that. And Einstein said something to the effect of, you know, you'll keep getting the same results if you keep using the same process that you're using. This time, the legislature counted on and the governor approved and the lottery commission approved additional line games, which is going to yield more revenues for the state, which to a certain extent does that Band-Aid that you described. In assuming, as you've described it, that there is this political paralysis out there in terms of our inability to have a fundamental conversation about our tax base, is it more likely than not that we're going to see more of these expansions of gambling, that we're going to go down the road and maybe make it an even more essential part of the budget-making process as we go forward?
I wouldn't be surprised. That is easier to do than to engage people about a sales tax or an overhaul of our tax expenditures. Those are difficult questions. I've talked about a sales tax and revamping our tax structure many times. And what happens when I talk about our computer models these plans that we had, and there was legislation in the last session, is by the time you end up answering one question, 5 more questions have popped up. It's very difficult. The sales tax, for example, that we looked at is modeled similar to Washington's. And for an example, Washington exempts high-tech machinery, on the idea that, well, if Microsoft or Intel had to pay a sales tax on an $80 million piece of equipment, they wouldn't put in there, they wouldn't build the plant, and so forth. So if we did that, and we put in that kind of exemption, then someone would say, see, Intel's getting a tax break here. And the politicians are taking everybody, all you suckers, for a ride. And it would just take that, to shoot down the entire thing. And we have to get over that. It is nuanced, I mean, and very complicated, although not that complicated if people want to pay attention.
Part of the problem is that when the lottery was formed, its purpose was economic development. You think back to like '84, the economy was in terrible shape. The housing market in Portland peaked in 1980. It took 8 years from that point for a price of a house in Portland to equal what it was in 1980. That's a little warning, by the way. And rural Oregon was in awful shape because agricultural prices were in the pits. But nobody defined what economic development was. So when the lottery, the Oregon lottery, and I used to work for the state, so maybe I'm biased, but it's actually a well-run organization for a lottery. And compared to a commercial casino, their productivity per worker is way higher than any casino. It's very well run. But it's been so successful that it came in with so much money that I think they saw opportunities, we saw opportunities to use the money for parks restoration, schools. In the state of Oregon, the net income from gambling, the biggest recipient of it are public schools. And so if you were to assign who's the largest shareholder of gambling, it's public schools. It's not Indian tribes. Indian tribes are third. Number two, by the way, are bars and restaurants, which has had, by the way, the perverse economic effect of making eating out cheaper in Oregon than in other states, but that's another story. So I think that that was the negative, and what's happened is we've used it as a backfill. You know, you give some tax break, a pollution control tax credit. You backfill by telling the lottery to produce more money. So what do? They add another machine in every bar. You just pressure them to come up with new games, a video keno, all these other things. And as a backfill, the state of Georgia, when it started its lottery, which is fairly recent, they had a smart idea. They decided not to use it for anything that the state government was spending money on already, particularly education. A lot of states start, we're going to put all the lottery money into education, and then what they do is they cut the general funding to education, to make up, and then use it for other things. Georgia set up a scholarship fund. Any kid graduating from a high school in Georgia gets a scholarship as long as they had a B average. And then a little bit of the money is any teacher who wants to get extra training in their field, public school or private, gets a scholarship. And as a consequence, you have a very high increase in the graduation rate in the state. University systems are doing well, and education's become very important. And there hasn't been this backfilling effect, but we have what we have.
Okay. Any comment, Dave? Or?
Well, I think again, it's quite apparent in the remark earlier, moving from kind of recreational, minor economic gain to the pressure on now, kind of like the self-fulfilling prophecy. You make $1, you want 2, and then you want 3. Give a mouse a cookie, and then they want, and it's just going to go on. And I think that
America, what a beautiful place.
What's that?
America, what a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's a great place for opportunity. I think, again, the concern would be if the data is correct, if the analysis is correct, that something like line games or video poker have the kind of personal, societal cost to them in the sense of addiction or problem gambling, then what is the next step? What's the next step? And are we not on a slippery slope that is just going to increase more and more possible problems, both for individuals and society alike? Because again, remember that all the positives on one side, there's also a corresponding cost to society also in the form of treatment, people that have end up in correctional institutions. And again, they may be a small percentage, but it's a cost we bear as a society.
Well, I'm going to thank our panel. I think Susan is going to move us to the next part of our presentation.
Thank you. We've come to the part of the program where those of you in the audience who are City Club members can ask questions. We'd ask that if you have comments to make, that you enter them on the Citizens blog, the online forum. But if you have a question, that is something that ends with a question mark, please come to the microphone. Our first question will be asked by board host Gwen Millius. Gwen is a member of the Board of Governors of City Club, and she's a co-founder of the New Leaders Forum, New Leaders Council. She's a partner with SRM, which is an architecture, interiors, and marketing firm. She's been a member of City Club since 1996. Gwen?
Thank you, gentlemen, for your comments today. You can't help but notice, and it's been mentioned today, that we as a society have agreed to allow ourselves legal access to another addictive substance, which is alcohol. Society-wide prohibition of alcohol is largely regarded as an untenable public policy today. There are other controlled substances. You can argue for and against prohibition of these other controlled substances, but there are other controlled substances that we've agreed to deny ourselves as a society, including marijuana, cocaine, and heroin. There's a scale that's recognized for these controlled substances that some are more dangerous than others. I wonder if there isn't some similar scale for gambling. Is bingo the same thing as video poker? Is the same thing as line games? Are there studies that show that some of these forms of gambling are more dangerous than others? And can we trust ourselves as a society, now that we're taking money from this activity, can we trust ourselves to tell ourselves what's too dangerous? Can we trust the state essentially to say, you know, we can't continue to introduce more and more dangerous forms of gambling?
Gwen, it's an interesting question about the, as I said before, 9/10 of the population are pathological gamblers. About 7% are alcoholics. 2.5% are addicted to narcotics. But when you look at pathological gamblers, they have very strong preferences. It is a third of the pathological gamblers in Oregon, their preferred form of gambling is bingo. Most of the bingo in the state is run by charities, some of which are churches. It's just true. Sorry to say. Video poker is the largest, and casino gambling, I think it was 23%. So casinos were their preferred place to go to gamble. And the rest were sports bettors. Sports betting is a serious, serious problem. I can't remember the last time anyone's been arrested for bookmaking in this city and actually, gone to jail for it. There are strong preferences. I know in the casino business, we've noticed that in people who go to the horse betting part of the casino, when it's done, they leave. They don't play video poker. They don't play slot machines. In the bingo halls, for the most part, they leave. They don't play these other games. There are just very strong preferences, even within pathological gambling communities. And I don't know the answer or why.
Doing this work is not always easy when some of your members are running bingo operations and your charities, but our advocacy is always in two places. We start first in the church, and then we go out to the larger society. But it was interesting is we also are fairly pragmatic visionaries, I think. I mean, part of our role, I think, is always to kind of keep what we would consider a value-based, justice, equitable principle, and at the same time realize we live in the real world, so we have to work with that. And I think as you talk about kind of the degree of susceptibility or the degree of addiction, again, with line games and the technology, there's really, public discussion on how do you tool the machine so that, in other words, you get timed out after so many minutes of play, or you can only bet so much money at a time. And I think that's not purely altruistic. It's a fact that it corresponds with the knowing that many of these products are actually designed to be enticing and addictive. I mean, there's an addictive quality to it. These decisions aren't made in some kind of what's the right word, altruistic think tank. I mean, they're done in, very scientifically, also to produce the maximum revenue, but also very well aware of the social costs of this and how do you minimize it.
Gwen, your question is intriguing. I do want to just read what it says in the Constitution. The lottery shall be operated for the maximum amount of net revenues commensurate with the public good.
Thanks.
Greg McPherson, City Club member, and along with Representative Haas, a member of the Oregon House of Representatives. I'm going to direct my question to Mr. Whelan, and it actually takes off on a point that Mr. Leslie was just making. The big growth in gaming is in electronic gaming, and it seems that there would be a great opportunity to identify who those problem gamblers are, the people whose lives are suffering by overuse. We cut off people when they've drunk too much in a bar. Can't we cut off people who've gambled too much in a bar?
You can. There's been a couple of strategies done. Again, if you have the person who identifies themselves as having a problem, in some states and in Canada, you can have yourself excluded from gambling establishments, which includes bars that have video poker. To have the machine electronically determine it is a tough one. Part of the problem is the way you define problem gambling. You look at some of the standards for how you qualify for it, and it is based partially on what you can afford to lose. It would be very difficult for Donald Trump, for example, to be a pathological gambler. He could gamble all day in front of a machine, and still he's earning more money than he's losing. And it's one of the reasons why a high percentage of bingo players are pathological gamblers is it's a low-income player game. So it does have impacts on their ability to pay rent, and that's some of the criteria for do you have a problem or not. But there may be ways to do that. There are timeout mechanisms that have been tried in Canada. It's kind of experimental, but ultimately you got to be able to get the person to seek treatment. Gambling treatment can be very successful.
Justin Gottlieb, City Club. I have a very simple question, which I think probably has a complex answer. Isn't gambling really an additional tax on the poor? The people who seem to gamble more are those with less discretionary income. And I guess this is directed at Robert and Mark. Is there any discussion or economic models that you've looked at in relation to that issue?
The answer is no. The higher you go up in income, the more you gamble. And the more often you gamble. It's not related to poverty, because that would imply that if I were to be able to wave a magic wand and cut your income to $5,000 a year, that suddenly you'd get an urge to gamble. You wouldn't. And I at one point in my life, I was on food stamps. I was homeless at one point. Believe me, I didn't gamble then. It's not true. In our studies, in our surveys, lotteries also, particularly with casinos, the lower 40% represent far, far fewer people that walk into a casino. The prime group for at least tribal casinos is the upper middle class in the state. And for gambling in general, as you go up in income, the more people gamble. Las Vegas didn't make its money getting welfare recipients to fly in and gamble. However, one reason why you may feel that way is when you look at the lotto games, the mega bucks, the Powerballs. Those kind of games do attract low-income people, because like that guy in Lake Oswego won the first mega bucks. He really, he didn't care. The attraction of having $1 million is a lifestyle change. That's the prize. It's not just a few extra bucks. It's a lifestyle change, which somebody with a very low income might be attracted to. But those kinds of games are a small percentage of the total in the state. I mean, maybe 3-4%.
I'd just like to add a little other thought on that. I mean, we use the term a lot, progressivity or regressivity in taxation. And one of the things in talking with the Department of Human Service problem gaming, and then looking at some Canadian studies, suggest that, for example, machine gambling, that 35 to 50% of the revenue is derived by problem gamblers. Now, I got to thinking about that and thinking about regressivity, because normally we think about that as the lower income carrying the higher burden of a tax or disproportionate. And I thought, well, if we're also thinking in human terms, then we might think that regressivity could be applied in a kind of more qualitative sense. That is, one who's more vulnerable, or one who has a little more at-risk indicator, maybe genetically or however you describe it. And in that sense, I think those that maybe the least, should be the least able to play, carry a larger burden. The other thing to think about, and that is the discretionary income. You may have an income scale, and you could say, well, yeah, 50% or more are above median income. But at the same time, their discretionary income index could be very, very small, and they're actually spending deep into that. So it's a little more complex.
I just want to maybe break with my colleague up here on referring to lottery as a tax for the poor or the rich. It's not a tax. There's a choice. You don't have to do it. You don't have to buy those tickets. You don't have to walk into a casino or a bar.
Mike Burton, City Club member. I appreciate Representative Haas bringing up the real question, which is tax reform. But my question, Mr. Whelan, you mentioned the acculturalization of gambling in Oregon. Of course, that was at a time when gambling was really state regulated and not state owned, which is now a monopoly. So the question really is one that hits around the rest of this, because we see lots of advertising about the lottery bringing good things. You have school teachers, you have firefighters, everybody, all these good things it does for you, which actually children, I think, then enforces the goodness of gambling. There's another state monopoly, and that's the sale of hard liquor. How do you feel about advertising that in the same way? Why don't we not, the OLCC, have a school teacher on television talking about please drink more because it helps fund the state?
I had trouble hearing you, quite frankly. You're asking me, okay, the lottery advertises, should other entities advertise?
State monopolies. Another state monopoly is alcohol, hard alcohol. We don't push that on TV like we do gambling. What's the difference?
Well, you're right. I mean, maybe you could have the lottery not advertise on TV. I mean, I have no problem with that. If that's the issue, the problem, but what you're suggesting is that a pathological gambler wouldn't gamble if you didn't advertise, but that's not going to be the case. So that kind of doesn't make sense. Most people who buy lottery tickets, the vast, vast majority who play lottery games are casual, small, $5 maybe bettors. They're not, and they are motivated by advertising. Advertising does have an impact on lottery sales. There's no doubt about it.
Do either of you want to add anything?
Well, I mean, clearly that's a great question. I mean, that's a part of our argument about what is the role of government. And we do know, I mean, there's no doubt that gaming, just like cigarettes, just like alcohol, produces, whether it's small or large, is irrelevant to us because it produces social cost and human cost to people. And the state intentionally is marketing this product. And not only that, marketing more and more every year, because the press is always there to build a new market, new people to gamble. Look at the horse racing industry. Some have said, it's kind of a dying, graying industry. The press is on because you know that once you're dependent on the revenue, you've got to keep it flowing. And I think that's been part of our argument is the state doesn't market the others because part of it is the public will would not tolerate it. I mean, to think about Oregon coming on, marketing hard liquor, cigarettes, I think we'd have a number of citizens come to the fore and say it's not appropriate because of the social cost. But here we don't do it, partially with gaming because it is so infused and so popular. Whether it's the right thing or not is another issue.
But part of it is they don't have to for liquor and cigarettes and beer. Budweiser does it for them. Seagram's does it for them. Philip Morris does the advertising in cigarettes. We don't stop them. We don't stop their billboards. And the racetrack is privately owned, and they advertise like crazy on TV. It's the nature of the market economy. They have to sell the product. But the question,
Well, obviously, this conversation doesn't have a natural end. I'd like to invite you to go to the website and add your comments, questions, and continue the discussion on Citizens Blog. I'd like to thank our moderator and our panelists for being here today and for treating us to a really excellent program. Thank you all for coming, and we are adjourned.